Welcome back to the 𝗀𝗚 Podcast, tzvi broker with Rav Gerzi, and we'd like to welcome all of our listeners, including our Torah Anytime listeners around the world. So let's start off with a conversation I had with one of our listeners. He gave me some feedback about our last podcast. If you didn't yet have a chance to listen to our last podcast, is Will AI Take Over Your Job? Make sure to listen on our channel. And what he shared is that this topic is a really big topic, and it seems that so many people are speaking about AI and what impact it's going to take on the workplace. And I validated what he shared. He felt that really what we discussed was an opening of a conversation. And I told him that 𝗀𝗚 Hashem, we're going to continue to speak about different angles. And really the way I coined it is that we're looking to discuss are certain core themes that are being brought up and surfacing about the workplace and about humanity because of this introduction of AI into the world. So 𝗀𝗚 Hashem, we're going to continue to speak about it, and I just wanted to be able to highlight one point that we mentioned last time before we jump into what we're going to be talking about today, which is that from our perspective, whether AI will take over your job or my job, AI will give this podcast, one thing is clear, is that this surgence of this technology and all the noise that it's making, right, is causing us to reconsider what it means to be a human being, right? Because there's this something else which is seemingly able to do as we can do, or perhaps better, right, in many areas. And therefore the question is that what does it mean to be a human being? What does it mean to be a human being in the first place? And we need to make sure, right, that we are being human and not just robotic, right? Because funny enough, if we're going to be robotic, then maybe a robot will just take over our job. We can't just be robotic. We've been saying that for a long time. He's being robotic, and then, hey, a robot can do it. And it's funny, perhaps HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw that we've been speaking about this and gave me this experience just since the last podcast. I had the opportunity to go ATVing. And I was with a group of people where we did some type of a גיבוש, like, what do they call it in English, a גיבוש?
I don't remember.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Certain words we forget. When you take staff together and they get together to be able to spend time together, recreation, I don't think that's what it's called. I think
team building.
Team building exercise. And we went ATVing out here in the hills in 𝗟𝗚. And while we were riding our ATVs up and down, at a certain point, the leader of the tour, where he had to stop and gather around and sit, by a certain viewpoint. And as we sat there, we were looking over the mountains, right? Then he started to tell us his story, right? And he went into the story explaining who he was and where he came from, his experiences that he had in the army, and then he went to outside of Israel, and then he came back, and ultimately what he was sharing, right, was this inspiring message that for him, being involved in ATVs, it's not about the ATV. You can do that all over the place, but he saw that through adventure and through outdoor experiences, people are able to understand what the land of Israel is and to be able to connect with their history and to be able to see places. And he was pointing out that this is the road that they traveled probably, from the Beis HaMikdash when they were going from this place to that place. He showed us a mikveh that they probably used when they were going from Uli Regel. And it was very inspiring. And I shared with one of my colleagues, I was like, for this person, it's not about the ATV. Like for this person he has a strong drive, he has a strong passion. For him, he wants to be able to feel in his way he's changing the world. And the way that he's bringing out that light is through taking people on these ATV journeys. And I thought I was reflecting on what we were speaking about in the podcast last time about this human element of being driven by our why, meaning what is driving us and how
it's not just about what he's doing, it's a story behind what he's doing that makes it even if you don't know about the story energetically, it's still there.
Exactly, that's what it is. It's that we're speaking about this point about that when a person's being driven by something deeper than the how and the what of what's being done, there's that why, it's felt. And that's something which is uniquely, at least right now, uniquely human. But we don't know, but at least now it's uniquely human. It's something we should consider. But what we're going to be speaking about today is about the topic of counterproductive productivity. I said that right? Counterproductive productivity, as funny as that might sound, right? And, productivity, you want to be productive, get more done, right? It's something you hear about a lot in the workplace, right? If you're a manager, you have someone telling you, get more productive. If you're an employee, right, you're thinking about your own productivity and how that's being looked at. And for sure, productivity is something which is a value, and I think is a very big part of the introduction and the acceleration of technology into our world, and where if we have certain tools, we can be more productive. So the question we really wanted to bring up for discussion here today is, can the productivity mindset actually backfire? Can the productivity become counterproductive?
I think that as well, we mentioned how sometimes you can have so many apps to help you become more productive, and tachlis, it takes away from your humanity.
Right.
We're not like a robot.
Right. We're not robots, and that's really the consideration, is that at what point does productivity somehow work against us in terms of what
because
we're so
structured.
Yeah, and I think that for a lot of people, they think this is like it's an AI story. The question is really, is this?
It's a much older story. It's a story from the Industrial Revolution, 1740, 1750 till about 1840, 1850. It was massive technological change, and the transitioning from being farmers and working the land and having very, so to speak, jobs to do with the hands, and then moving to the factory and post-factory, pre-factory, post-factory. And the reality is that human beings were looked upon as part of the machinery. So for example, if a person would go to the shop, do we have any food packages around? Don't know. So if you look at the side of the food package, you have all of the nutritional values of the food. Where did that start from? So it's an amazing thing to reflect upon. It started from the Industrial Revolution, because what started to happen is that the human was looked upon as a part of the machinery producing this product, and at first they had to feed them. And when they fed them only sugars and carbohydrates, they developed diseases relating to the foodstuff that they were eating, and they became ill. So then they had to figure out, okay, we have to add in more vegetables. We have to add in vegetables or meat, whatever it may be. That developed into what we call our, pyramid of healthy eating, which is really
became as a result of trial and error of what to feed factory workers.
That's one presentation, one evolution of that stems from the Industrial Revolution, and they looked upon the human being as part of the machinery. So this story of AI, it's happening now. The second, so to speak, evolution is that even now the human being doesn't have to be part of the narrative, and it's on a certain respect it's scary. Productive, like. You look at Google, or you look at Facebook, you look at some of the big organizations, they give you time to sleep. Once upon a time, it was looked upon, sleep when I die. But we see creativity, we see productivity is boosted when we sleep. And they give room to put your head down if you're stuck on something, just to get the juices working again. So it's very fascinating, because sleep is very humanistic. Don't bring your sleep to work.
Right.
Don't bring your stress to work. When you come to work, you have to be incredibly productive. It's that there's a new wave, a new shift that's occurring now, which again, it's not a new story, it's actually an old story. The questions that are being asked now, it wouldn't surprise me if these were the questions in the Industrial Revolution they were asking.
It's really fascinating.
And sometimes we could be so mechanical that we're trying to be the machine, and we're losing the humanistic touch. You're going to speak about, hopefully, education.
Yeah, for sure, education space. I still remember the first time that I came across this historical perspective. I didn't think I learned this when I learned about the Industrial Revolution back in high school.
But as well, by the way, education is to do with the Industrial Revolution as well. Our classrooms in education haven't changed for the last few hundred years. And so, for example, we've spoken about this in the podcast. Sometimes our soft skills that are needed for the workplace we are completely missing in the educational space. So in the workspace, we are encouraged to be self-sufficient. We're encouraged to be, to manage ourselves. We are encouraged to do our own research, whereas in the classroom, it's micromanaging. It's fitting into a schedule, no scheduling. You're
saying even the structure. We spoke the structure
education.
of education was influenced by this shift that took place back then.
Correct.
Yeah.
So it really, we never have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have to look in history. Where am I right now in history that this narrative has played out? And in Torah, we look at it like this. In Torah, we look at it where this is not a new story. Right. People get very scared. We don't have to be scared. We have to look. So the Industrial Revolution is a good place to start, because the same idea of the human being part of the furniture and machinery in a factory is now the history repeating itself, that now we've got AI taking the place of the human being. So we have to look, what is the human being? What is our tafkid?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I know that the first time that I saw this was reading through a book by Barry Schwartz, and it was one of the leaders. He wrote a book called Why We Work, where he was just looking at this, what people speak about today. We spoke about in the podcast. If you haven't had a chance to listen, check out from series 1, where the disengagement crisis and people aren't being engaged. Now, I was just at a conference this week where about EOS, and they were speaking about this, wild numbers speaking about the disengagement crisis of what takes place in the workplace, and the questions are being asked. Well, okay, what actually makes people work? And he went back. This was the first time I was introduced to this, going back to the Industrial Revolution, and it was so eye-opening for me, because it's a really fascinating, quasi-scary reality when we have that moment where we realize that we were born into something and took it for granted that's the way that it just is, and just realize, hey, actually that's just the cause of some shift that took place. And yeah, it's something to really consider, that the mindsets or the hashkafas that have been impacted, maybe coming from this mindset that took place a few hundred years ago regarding how to look at people. Do we just look at processes? Do we look at people? And then what has happened to the workplace because of that? And then seeing the impact of that and considering changes that we need to make. There was a couple of stories you mentioned about education that really highlight about what happens when productivity becomes counterproductive. So one of them, I'm unclear. I believe it was in one of the examples given by 𝗀𝗽𝗧, who was one of the.
Yes.
I believe it's from his book. I wasn't sure if it was him or Sir Ken Robinson, but I'm pretty sure it's from 𝗀𝗽𝗧, where he discusses what took place, right, when in the education system decisions were made, right, and then in order to be more productive, right, in order so that therefore we can achieve more with less amount of time, where we're going to standardize curriculums, right?
I think Ken Robinson, so Ken speaks about it as well.
He speaks about it as well. It makes sense they would both speak about it.
But the idea is a profound idea.
Yeah, so you have these teachers, right, who, the way it worked was the teacher wanted to be able to teach and inspire. He was given a certain topic and then developed a curriculum. And now we'd say, that takes time, right? That's burning human resources, right? Let's make curriculums and then have these teachers and say, hey, teachers, go teach. And what happens?
The creativity goes.
Right? And the teachers
are not engaged.
Sucked out all of their ratzon, sucked out the desire to want to teach. Because if a person understands the human experience of teachers, right? Why does a teacher? I know from my own working with people and directing people in terms of career direction. So, what makes a person want to teach? Right. So there's an element, perhaps, of a person wanting to be able to help. But for many teachers, a strong component is the ability to be able to be creative.
Yeah.
So if you now take a teacher and say, okay, no creativity, just give over this information. Suddenly the teacher doesn't want to wake up in the morning. Suddenly the teacher is handing in a resignation letter and saying, hey, I may have been teaching for 10, 15, 20 years.
I'm not interested in
this anymore, because this is not what I bought into. Right? So here you have a situation of being productive ends up becoming counterproductive in terms of what the end goal is, because even if you have the teachers that teach, but if you give them that script, it takes out who they are. It takes out that spark of their ability to be able to ignite in other people. The other example that this was something that just happened to me yesterday, 2 days ago on a bus. Though it's happened numerous times. I had an experience with a bus driver, and it's fascinating. It's fascinating. This is the hypothesis that I have. I'm not sure if I shared it with you properly before. Is that if you take a look, for example, right, of people that are in the driving industry, right? So I like to break it down into 3 categories, right? You have truck drivers, you have bus drivers, and you have cab drivers. Right, so if you have all 3 of them, hopefully should like driving. Hopefully, I know from like a career coach perspective, hopefully they all like driving. So what's the difference between the 3? So if someone doesn't like people and just like driving, he should be a truck driver, right? Be a truck driver, you know? 𝗀𝗪 𝗀𝗧. If a person really loves people and he loves driving, so he should be a cab driver. And we've all had, you know, if you've ever been in a cab, I'm not sure, maybe I'm being a bit biased here in 𝗬𝗧, where you're allowed to talk to the cab driver, but you know, I think in 𝗀𝗧, if you speak to the cab driver, like it's like against the law, or like there's like a okay. For any people that have ever had that experience, or at least been to 𝗬𝗧 and had such an experience where you meet certain cab drivers, you feel like, you know, even the 𝗀𝗧, you know, like when they go and they take your bag out of the trunk, like did they do it with a smile, or they just like pop the trunk and like, you know,
go get it yourself.
You go do it, right?
Yes.
So hopefully if you like people and you like driving, so then you become a cab driver. What if you like people a bit, right? Not as much, you know, you really don't like people, but you don't love them, so then you become a bus driver. Right? So become a bus driver. It's sometimes like, I'm like, meet cab drivers, I'm like, he should have been a truck driver. You know, you meet the bus driver, I'm like, you know, he should have been a cab driver. You know, like the guy who's talking to people the whole entire time. So what's happened to the driver industry in buses? So a bus driver used to have 3 jobs. Job number 1 was to drive the bus. Job number 2 was to collect payments, right? Job number 3 was to also know the route.
Yeah.
Now, and for some people that are listening, maybe it's been like this ever since you can remember. I don't remember exactly when the shift took place, but slowly within time, right, at least here in 𝗬𝗧, what I've seen over the last number of years, right, bus drivers no longer need to know the route, right? Sometimes you ask the driver, like, you know, do you know where to get off? And he's like, I don't know. I'm just listening, you know, just listening to where I'm meant to be going, to the GPS. He has no idea where he's driving. Then, drivers here in 𝗬𝗧 don't need to collect money anymore.
You have
because people have the card. It used to be there were stages. First you had to give money to the driver and he'd give you change. Then it's like, okay, then you have to punch the card. Then you at least have to swipe the card at the front of the bus. Now it's like, no. You can get on wherever you want. There are different places you can swipe or take a picture with your app, right? And what happens is that the bus drivers themselves, they don't even care if you, like, it's like you get on the bus, like it doesn't make a difference if you pay, because it's just like, just get on the bus already, It's not their job anymore. So what's happened to someone who is a bus driver is that their job no longer is about the interaction with the people
or the processing.
Or about the processing. So what does the job of a bus driver just become? It becomes like a truck driver.
A glorified truck driver, yes.
Except the difference is, it's a truck driver with obstacles. Yeah. Do you know what those obstacles are? People.
Yeah.
At least if you're a truck driver, you can go where you want just to deal with traffic. But it's like, I've had this experience, right? And I'm not, 𝗀𝗧 𝗀𝗪 speaking 𝗬𝗧 about all bus drivers, but I've had this experience where you engage drivers that it's almost if like they don't want to pick it. Why are you talking to me? Like, why are you talking to me? Why are you getting on the bus? It's like, just get on, just quick. Do you have to pay? It doesn't make a difference. It's just like, and it's eaten away at the fabric of what it actually means to be a bus driver and to have that connection with people.
Yeah. It used to be once upon a time you'd get on the bus, you'd know the person's name, there'll be that humanistic interaction. When you'd go to the shop and you'd buy something, you'd know the person. It used to be, hello, how you doing? Yeah. Nothing. Sometimes it's just, there's no one there. Sometimes you'd go and you just pay, don't see anybody. It's changing our world ever so quickly, yes.
Yeah, and the reason why I'm mentioning it, is because you may look you may look and say, okay, so maybe it doesn't make a difference. If I'm a person who's getting on a bus, do I need to interact with that bus driver? Maybe I don't need to interact. I don't need to interact with the bus driver. So then the truth is that if I don't need to interact with this bus driver anymore, so do you know what's going to happen to bus drivers pretty soon? They're going to get out of a job.
Yep.
AI will take them over. Because who needs to have a bus? Why do I need to have a human being there? And this is the point that we were mentioning last time, is that what we need to consider here is that if we're going to be human, we need to be human.
And we have to allow for the fact that we're not machines.
Exactly.
The processing,
Because, and I think that even from a productivity perspective, right, once again, maybe it depends on the people that are running the company and how they look at things, but if you're running a bus company, what do you care about? Do you care about if people are happy with your service? Do you care about if people are satisfied? I'm not sure if people are paying attention to recognize the fact that there are so many people that the experience of being on a bus becomes dampened because of an experience with a driver that seems to just not care. And why doesn't he care? It used to be that he did. But slowly, as we took away pieces of his job, no longer it's about interacting with people. No longer is it about the problem solving of thinking like, oh, there's traffic this way, maybe I need to go to traffic that way. So what does a human being want to do? He wants to feel like he's needed doing something. So he says, my job is I need to get this bus from here to here as fast as I can. And he feels, therefore, each time there's a distraction, it's like, you're stopping me from doing my job well, because what else is my job? My job isn't about interacting with people. You can just pay. I have nothing else left to do. It's a fascinating thing, and it's just something for us to be sensitive about. I think, even if you're not in the bus driving industry, for topics for all of our listeners, is to consider where has our desire to be productive on some level been eating away at being human and our humanity. And because it's about the productivity, I can get more done. Have you been at a meeting and people are sitting there at the meeting and everyone's on their computers? Like while they're sitting there in the meeting and everyone's just like, well, why should I sit there and listen to the meeting? Because I can listen and also answer my messaging and also work on 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 and also do this.
It's having this balance of having, for example, the apps that allow us to be productive, the sleep app, and the this app, and the that app, and balancing up. Sometimes I just want to, for a period of time, allow myself to, so to speak, drift away from all the apps. See what happens. Let's notice what happens. Maybe there could be time where we are using all these apps in order to make us productive, but then there's times where I can completely get rid of the app and don't take my phone and go for a walk and don't look at the clock.
Right.
Like there's a balancing act. There's a balancing act, and it's not always simple, but that's why we're having these conversations to allow us to think about it.
And it's even though the Industrial Revolution, as we said, this is not a new question. The times that we live in have brought up new, like for a person who's working on themselves, and a person, right, a ben avoda, these are real subtle questions to ask. What you just said right now is that on one hand, right, we're not here to say that technology is bad. Yes, you can have an app that will help you to become more productive, to manage your time, to measure your sleep, to measure what you eat, all those things, and it's amazing. At the same time, it's helpful, but it's also on some level eating away at something else.
Yes.
And we need to become aware of it. The way that I would suggest breaking it down is as two categories. There's types of work that we do which are not interacting with people. Right? And in that situation, if your job and your role of what you're doing is not interacting with people, so then you don't have this aspect of, am I becoming less of a human being for another? But there's still a question within myself of, am I respecting who I am? Am I respecting what my needs are? Am I doing too much that I'm just not being functional? Which is a big topic within itself, and it's not a topic for right now, in terms of about knowing one's limits and knowing one's work style. But for sure, if your job is a job where you interact with other human beings on some level, right, we need to become aware of, is all of my strategy and all of my tools and all of my gadgets that are enabling me to become uber productive, how is that perhaps impacting how I show up for another person?
יפה.
And where the interaction is somehow this person felt right now, maybe I didn't actually have an interaction with a human. Maybe I don't really feel like I had an interaction. Because once that starts happening, there's something very, very, very subtle. And once again, in the name of productivity, it may seem like this is the way to go, but something very, very subtle is disintegrating, and it could first and foremost hurt us internally. And in terms of productivity globally, if we don't just look at, okay, how fast did you get from place A to place B? How many emails did you get sent out? Well, what about the relationships? What about the interactions? What about the people? What about the feeling of a team that you've created? Well, maybe that's not productive to do that. Maybe we can just send emails. Maybe we can just, do we need to actually come and sit down together and have a cup of coffee and eat cake and go ATVing? Isn't that a waste of money? Perhaps. Or is productivity not just an equation of 1 + 1 = 2?
יפה.
And I think this is amazing questions. So what could be a walkaway for us? What could be our challenge question for our listeners?
When you are speaking to somebody, when you're with a human being, even if it's a transaction, remember there's a human being. When you're paying for something and you've got the pleasure of being served by a human being, remember they are a person, they have a life, and they're a whole world. Just to talk to them, make eye contact. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I think that's one place where we could for sure upgrade connection. I think that's one place where we for sure upgrade connection.
Okay, amazing. I'm in. I'm going to be in. We invite our listeners to take up this challenge. It may seem very simple, but it's crazy. We can't take it for granted today. Can't take it for granted. Especially in the messaging space. In a span of 1 minute, you could be communicating with more people than a person spoke to in a month. 100 years ago. It's a wild thing, but to recognize these are people, and we have to try to be able to maintain that balance. And once again, thanks for tuning in. It's a pleasure to be back in our series here in the 𝗀𝗚 Podcast. And please make sure to share this wisdom, like this wisdom. Sharing is caring, as I like to say. And B'ezras Hashem to partner with us in being able to spread this wisdom of the Torah out to a greater audience, right? And to have the 𝗧his B'ezras Hashem to partake in sponsoring an episode of this podcast, so that therefore we're able to reach a greater audience.
L'chaim tovim u'l'shalom.
Amen.